The opening has ended. You've developed your pieces. Your opponent has developed their pieces. You've castled. Your opponent has castled. You have nice control over the center. Your opponent has nice control over the center. And both of you don't really have any obvious weaknesses. What should you do now? This is the question that we're going to attempt to answer in this video. This is a poll that I did on the channel, and this was the top voted response by far as which topic you wanted covered when it comes to improving as a chess player. There are 4 things that I think if you keep in mind, it's really going to help you answer the question of what do I do now? All right, so this position is a position from the Gyuko piano main line. So let me show you how we ended up here. Okay, we played knight f3, we attacked the pawn, and black defended the pawn. We brought our bishop out, and black brought their bishop out. This is very standard stuff. We played c3, they attacked our pawn, and one of the ways that we can deal with this, one of the more kind of calm, solid options rather than the sort of aggressive d4 would be you just defend it with d3, okay? Black plays d6, we castle, they castle, we bring our bishop out, they attack us, we go back, they bring their bishop out, we defend with our knight, and they play a6. Okay, this is pretty common. I'm sure this has probably happened to a lot of you, or at least something similar, right? Both players really feel like they've gotten their pieces where they want them to be. They both feel like it's a pretty solid position. Nobody really has a huge advantage one way or the other. So there's, of course, if you ask different people, you're going to get different answers, but I'm going to give you my opinion. As a 2200 rated player, this is how I like to think about this part of the game. Okay, the number one thing that I like to do is look for big weaknesses that my opponent may have made. Now, I understand in this particular example and kind of the topic for the video, most of the time that's not going to be the case. But it needs to be said, sometimes your opponents make one little move, and it's actually a big mistake. So let me actually back up here. And instead of the move a6, I want you to imagine that your opponent played the move queen to d7, which, okay, they're trying to connect their rooks. They're bringing the queen up to a nice square. But there's something about this move that jumps out at me as like, wait a second, that doesn't look right. So if you would like to pause, what do you think I'm noticing as soon as I see my opponent put the queen on d7? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, I'm noticing the knight on f6. Now, why am I noticing that? Before, it was pinned. Now it's no longer pinned, so the knight can move. But more importantly, before it was defended by the queen. And if I were to have captured this, then the queen would have just came out. And that's probably just going to help out black. But as soon as they play queen to d7, if I were to take this, they have to take back this way. And why do I care about that? Because look at their king. Their king is now exposed, and I can start thinking about ways to attack the king, right? So this jumped out at me right away, and this would be where I would immediately start to focus. And this is huge because this happens all the time, even at levels up to, even at my level, this happens. Like people like make mistakes in the opening or right out of the opening, and you have to be able to understand, oh, that's not right. Something about that move is wrong, and you have to be able to notice, okay, I think it's because this, right? And now I can attack the king. So how would we kind of follow up to that? What do we do now? Well, if you want to pause, go ahead, actually. All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, I'll give you my opinion. What I would be looking at is the move knight to h4. And why am I looking at that move? Well, I want to attack the king, but how do I get pieces over to the king? Well, the bishop can't really get over there. I mean, it's kind of stuck. The knight is kind of stuck. This knight can't really go here. You can't really go here. You can go here, though, and it opens up my queen. And it opens up this pawn. So maybe if I move my king, I can move my pawn. I can use my queen. I can actually bring my rook up and over. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking about attacking the king, right? This is kind of a plan is forming in my mind because, goes all the way back to here, because my opponent did something that was not quite right. Okay, so that's what you want to think about. And then obviously you have to figure out what it is that they did wrong and how do you take advantage of that. Okay, let me give you another example. If they play the move b6, I want you to pause and think, what should your plan be now? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, there's 2 things that come to mind immediately when I see this move. Number one, the knight on c6 all of a sudden is undefended. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at different moves that potentially attack the knight. Now, in this case, none of these moves look, amazing to me because the knight can just move somewhere. It's not like it's a pin or anything or a fork. So I'm going to move on from that, but I just want to point that out. The other thing is this pawn now takes away the square from the bishop. So if I were to play the move b4, Where's the bishop gonna go? Looks like it's trapped. Looks like it's trapped. Looks like I'm gonna probably win a bishop, right? So that's what I'd probably play, right? Go after the bishop. But again, notice how as soon as I saw something weird that my opponent did, like, wait a second, isn't that bishop kind of stuck now? That was what my plan was going to be for the next couple moves based on that mistake that my opponent made. Okay. You have to always start there. You always have to start there. Okay. Now, I know a lot of you are saying, well, that's great, but most of the time they don't do that. Or if they don't do that, what do I do? Okay. So let's move on. The second thing that I like to think about is being patient. Being patient. See, a lot of people think to be good at chess, you have to like go crazy and just force this amazing checkmate on your opponent. No, a lot of good players, actually, the majority of good players are very patient and they wait until you make that mistake. And then once you make the mistake, it kind of feels like they jump all over you, like bam, bam. And then the queen comes in and then the rook comes up eventually. And it's all like all of a sudden you get checkmated. But really, they were being patient and waiting for you to make that mistake, right? So that's exactly what you can keep doing, right? You could try to figure out what's the most solid move that I could play that doesn't create any extra weaknesses in my position. Okay, so for example, a move like h3. It's a pretty good move in these types of openings, right? Because it gives your bishop some place to go if it needs to. It gives your knight another option. It gives your king some room so you don't have back rank mate problems in the future. And it takes away the square from the knight and the bishop, right? It's a very solid move, doesn't really create any weaknesses. Another one might be bringing the rook to the center. Could be an idea, and I have to be careful because there is this potential threat, not at the moment, but maybe queen to c2, right? These are the kind of things that you want to think about. And if you're not careful, you can actually be the one who makes the mistake. So let me give you an example of that. Queen to b3. At first glance, it's like, ooh, that's a nice move. Looks like it's attacking the pawn, attacking the bishop here, lining up there. Looks like a fork, right? Wrong. What is your opponent going to play? Well, if they're smart, they're probably going to play knight to a5. Attacking your queen, you got to move the queen now. It also defends that, by the way. And once you move, they're going to take your bishop. And you say, well, that's just a trade. But really, bishops are slightly better than knights. And that's a small thing, but it's something that gives your opponent a little bit of an advantage, right? And if you make a couple of those little things in a row, next thing you know, you're just in a losing position. So it's very, very crucial that when you get to this moment in the game, you're very patient and you think very carefully before you make moves that weaken your position. Okay, so what I would do in this position is probably play the move b4, chase this bishop, let's just say back here, and now maybe queen b3 makes more sense because you don't have to worry about knight a5, right? You've taken that away. So I was very careful about that, and the weaknesses that I created from playing the move b4 would be this, probably. But that's not really going to be attacked anytime soon. I don't even see a way that black could attack it. You can't go there. This knight can't attack it. The queen can't attack it. The bishop can't attack it. And after I play queen b3, it's already defended again, and I could even use my rook. So it's not really a big weakness. Okay, so that's why I'm okay playing that move, right? So again, just to kind of recap, be patient. It's okay to just play these really quiet moves that almost seem like they don't do anything, but they're just kind of keeping your position really solid, and you're waiting for your opponent to make that first mistake. All right, now the third thing that you can think about is actually making a threat. Okay, so I want to actually back up a second here. Let's just say that black, instead of a6, they had played the move rook to e8, which, by the way, this looks like a solid move. Nothing jumps out at me as like, oh, that's a terrible move. But if they did this, one plan that I could come up with would be to maybe try to take advantage of this bishop. So I'd like you to pause. What's a plan that we can think of to take advantage of attacking this bishop? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move that I was thinking of is a4. And this is actually a clever way to threaten to trap the bishop. So for example, let's just say black, I don't know, plays queen e7. They don't really realize what we're doing. We can now play b4, attack it. They have to go back, and then a5. Notice how I set that little trap by playing the a pawn first. They didn't see it coming, and here we go. We've trapped the bishop. We're going to win a piece. So that's just a simple example of how I targeted a piece in a clever way, and maybe I'll win a piece, right? So you can do stuff like that depending on the position, right? Depending on the weaknesses that your opponent creates, right? So that's going to be different in every opening and in every position, okay? But I just wanted to give you an idea. Like sometimes there's these little short-term threats, and as long as it doesn't weaken your position a lot, you can try that. So like in this case, a4, it's not a super weakening move. Like I'm not really weakening anything in my position by doing this. Like you could say the b3 square is a little bit weak, but I don't really care. I mean, I already have that defended 3 times. and it's not like my king's over there. It's not like black is ready to hop in there. It's just so I'm okay playing a4 is what I'm saying, right? So that's fine. There's also in the same kind of category of making threats, longer term plans that you can come up with. Okay, this was a very short term plan. It was like a 1, 2, 3 move little bishop trap. But you could say, you know what? I'm going to attack the king, and the way that I'm going to do that is by trying to get my rook involved by pushing my f pawn. Okay, well, you can't do that because you're king. So the start of the plan would probably be like king to h1. And then the next part of the plan would be probably moving the knight somewhere. Let's just say we moved it to e1. And then the next part of the plan would be, to play f4. And now you're carrying through with that. The rook's getting involved, the queen is getting involved, and you're threatening stuff like this. That's more of a longer term. Let's attack the king. You can do stuff like that. But here's where I want you to be careful. A lot of people, they start working on these plans and they forget that, like, hey, your opponent's going to be doing stuff. And depending on what they're doing, you're going to have to stop and react. So you can't just, put all your eggs in one basket of let's just go crazy and attack and forget about everything else, or you're going to find yourself in trouble. All right. So I hope that makes sense. And the fourth thing that I want to mention is that the plans that you need to come up with, a lot of the times they are very specific to which opening you are playing, right? Like you're playing a Gyuko piano, or you're playing a Ruy Lopez, or you're playing a King's Gambit, or a Queen's Gambit, or something else. The plans are going to be different. They're going to be totally different. So you kind of need to get familiar with whatever your particular opening is. So I'm going to actually give you a good example, and I want to switch to a different opening that I'm more familiar with. I don't play this closed setup of the Gyuko piano often myself, so I couldn't really tell you like what White's major plans are in this position. It's just not something that I'm super familiar with. So let me switch over to a different opening here. The Sicilian defense. Okay, I like to play knight to f3. And let's see, which line do I want to show you? I think I'll show you this one. I like to play the bishop b5 check lines. There's a couple ways that black can respond, knight c6, knight d7, or bishop d7. I want to focus on the bishop d7 one here. Usually what I will do is take it. And then the best move for black is actually to take with the queen. That's because the knight does better on c6 than on d7. And so by taking with the queen, you still give the option for the knight to go here. So I'll play d4. Takes, knight can come out. And I like to play the move c4. This is called a Maroczy bind setup where I'm really clamping down on the center here. A lot of times we'll get something like this. g6, knight c3, bishop g7 attacks me. I defend it. The knight comes out, attacks here. Maybe sometimes the knight comes over here, so I'll usually play f3. Black usually castles. I usually will castle. And then there's a couple of different ways black can play. A lot of times they'll play a6. And usually what I will do is play queen d2 first to kind of set this up potentially. And then let's just say there's different ways black can do this. Let's say they play the rook over here. I'll usually put my pawn on b3, put my pawn on a4, and this is kind of my setup. All right, so the opening is basically ended. And I'm actually pretty familiar with the idea that one of the plans in this position is to take advantage of what's happening over here on the queen side. Okay, so a lot of times what this looks like is something like a5, and maybe either putting a knight or a bishop on the square, and it really shuts down what black is trying to do. Like black would like to play b5 and kind of open things up and get the rooks involved and then move the knight, unleash the bishop. But I'm trying to prevent that. So a lot of times I'll do something like this, and I don't know, let's just take, let's say they play here. I might play knight to a4, and I'm getting ready to come in here. So for example, if black goes here, boom, I already have a fork. Okay, so they're, obviously not going to do that. Let's say they, bring the rook over here. I'm still going to bring my knight probably in and take advantage of this. Or actually, here's another one, take here, and if they take with the pawn, then the bishop can come in. So they're probably not going to do that. Let's say they take with the rook. But still, notice I have lots of options for bringing a bishop or a knight in. And I can also bring my rook here, or maybe even this one to get out of the pin. And I'm lining up here. But what the point I'm trying to make here is that I've played this opening, and I know that like these are some of the ideas that I want to keep in the back of my mind, right? Like, okay, I'm going to push the pawn, and I'm going to sink my knight in here, and I'm going to keep this, solid center to try to prevent black from playing d5. And I know that they might do that, but if they do, I'm going to be ready by bringing my rooks over. And you understand how like this opening has these plans attached to it. That's what I need to learn. That's what I need to be familiar with. But this is going to be totally different if we take an opening like the King's Gambit, right? Like e4, e5, f4. The plans that I just talked about like expanding on the queen side and taking control of the b6 square, You're not going to see any of that in the King's Gambit. You're just not. It's totally different, right? So there's definitely some value to choosing an opening and just getting really familiar with it. And one of the best ways to do this is checking out top players' games in a particular opening. So don't look at like 10 random games from, Magnus Carlsen. Look at 10 games where he played the same opening. I don't know if Magnus actually plays the King's Gambit, but, pick 10 games where he played the same opening and see what he did. And that's how you kind of pick up on those patterns and ideas. And actually, if you guys are interested enough, maybe we'll start a series where you can vote on which opening you want to cover, and we'll talk about what are some of those ideas and plans for each particular opening, because that's really probably going to be the most beneficial to you guys. So I hope that helps. And let me know in the comments, follow-up questions, or if things weren't clear. But those are kind of the 4 things that I would think about. The big weaknesses that your opponent might make, just keep an eye out. It might happen, it might not. Be patient. Like, just don't try to force it. Wait for those weaknesses to happen. The third one is, you can make threats. Some are short-term threats, some are longer-term threats. And then the fourth thing is, like, really try to get familiar with your particular opening by looking at some of the top players. And if you need, occasionally you can use Stockfish to help you as well. So, all right, guys, that's all I have. And see you next time. Stay sharp. Play smart. Take care.